I will call this meeting to order. The chair notes there's a quorum present, and we'll do the flag. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's a lot of you out there, so I wanted to just, before we kick into the regular meeting, just kind of give an overview of what to expect. This is a regular county court meeting, and so we record all of those meetings, just so you know. Those will be on YouTube. We'll be posting it probably later this week. So we have a few items of business the county court will take over, and then we'll go ahead and go into our town hall session, which I think is what the reason most of you are here. So bear with us for a few minutes, and then we'll get right into the town hall. Let's go into 2.0. Any additions or revisions to the agenda? No. Okay. 3.0, public comment. Individuals wishing to address the county court may do so at this time and at other times throughout the meeting. Speakers are asked to raise your hand to be recognized by the chair, give your name and address, and limit comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody who wants to make a public comment, at least initially? Okay, let's go into consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda, which consists of consider approval of February bills pending review, consider approval of February 19th regular meeting minutes, consider approval of Aurora Solar LLC application for activities in the county right-of-way, and consider approval of drive-in loan modification promissory note and trust deed addendum. Is there further discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Right into new business, 5.0, consider approval of Omega Morgan lease amendment. Sherry, do you want to?
I would. We had a communication from Eric Zander from Omega Morgan, and they wanted to increase their lease at Shuttler Station by 3 acres. And I think they wanted that just as soon as they could get it, so hence it's on the agenda this week. And I think that'll last for about 2 months.
Okay.
They're bringing in more pieces and parts,
Sounds good.
and we're happy to have them.
So it'll be the same rates as
Yes,
already
just
existing in the agreement. It's just adding
the 3
acres. Okay.
So I move to approve the request from Omega Morgan to add 3 acres to their current lease at Shuttler Station for a period of 2 months.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the request from Omega Morgan to add 3 acres to their current lease at Shuttler Station for a period of 2 months. Is there further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's go on to 5B. Consider approval of proclamation expressing opposition to Senate Bill 1530, an act relating to greenhouse gas emissions. Leslie.
This proclamation addresses several concerns related to the cap and trade legislation, it's hard to say, including increased utility and fuel prices, unnecessary use of the emergency clause, inappropriate use of the legislative short session, and the impact of the current stalemate on passage of other critical legislation. So if it pleases the court, I would recommend we approve it.
Okay. Any thoughts, Sherry?
I'm totally in agreement with the proclamation and how it's worded.
Okay. As you guys know, the legislature is sort of in a stalemate right now with lack of quorum. So my intention would be, if we decide to go forward with this, we would sign it and then submit it to Senate President Peter Courtney and the Speaker of the House, Tina Kotek, and obviously CC our local representatives so that they know that we've weighed in. There's also been a couple of citizens who have reached out to us directly, and so I would be happy to follow up with them as well.
Great. Do you think that, I know our agendas, our day is pretty tight today, do you think that if we decide to go forward with this, we can do it today?
I think we should be able to get it emailed probably this afternoon before we head to Arlington. So, Yep.
Well, I move we approve the proclamation expressing opposition to Senate Bill 1530, an act relating to greenhouse gas emissions as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve a proclamation expressing opposition to Senate Bill 1530, an act relating to greenhouse gas emissions as presented. Is there further discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are right into the town hall meeting. So I'll just start by kind of giving a little bit of background before we invite our guests up. As most of you probably know, or you wouldn't be in this room, February 13th, the Oregon Department of Energy issued a notice of violation to Chemical Waste Management of the Northwest, which is a subsidiary of Waste Management, for violations of Oregon administrative rules prohibiting the disposal of radioactive materials within the state of Oregon at our landfill just outside of Arlington. So the court has invited representatives from Oregon Department of Energy and Waste Management, both who have been very eager to come and help answer questions and provide an update on sort of where we are with the notice of violation and what folks can expect going forward. So if we could, I'd like to invite Oregon Department of Energy up first. Okay. Teresa's reminding me that we have to speak up because this is a bigger room than we're used to. And so folks in the audience know our intention here is to have Oregon Department of Energy present for 15-20 minutes. Waste Management will then also present for 15-20 minutes, and the court will ask initial questions, and then we'll go ahead and open the floor so that if there's anything we didn't cover that you really would like an answer to, people in the audience have an opportunity to pose those questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you. Judge Farrar, members of the county court, I'm Ken Niles. I'm the assistant director with the Oregon Department of Energy. With me is my colleague Jeff Burright, who has been our lead technical analyst on this issue. Do appreciate the invitation to come here both this afternoon and tonight in Arlington. You've already provided a real brief overview. I'll go into a little bit more detail of what happened and where we're at right now. We'll then hear from Jeff in a little bit more detail as to why we're confident that the waste where it is does not pose any type of health risk. Jeff will also explain some of the next steps in terms of our requirements of chemical waste management to develop a risk assessment and also a corrective action plan. So he'll go into a little bit of detail on those things. So in September last year, we were notified by a North Dakota resident that thought there was a possibility some radioactive waste from the Bakken oil fields was being disposed illegally within the state of Oregon. Took a few days to chase it all down. We talked with Chemical Waste Management. We did determine that, in fact, a waste hauling company had been bringing waste to the landfill at Arlington. When we learned of this, we had two immediate priorities. The first was to shut off the waste stream and make sure that there's no additional waste coming in. And that was accomplished very quickly. Chemical Waste Management immediately suspended any additional receipt of that type of waste. The second priority we had was to ensure that there was no public risk to the workers, to the public at large, or to the environment. And based on information that we received from Chemical Waste Management in terms of waste manifests, based on information we received from the state of North Dakota, in consultation with our Oregon Health Radiation Protection Services, we did conclude that there was no immediate risk. And again, Jeff will go into more detail on that important topic. With those initial priorities met, we then had an opportunity to really assess the situation. We've not had a situation like this before. We wanted to make sure of our authorities, to fully understand our rules and statutes as they related to this incident. We talked to other Oregon state agencies that might have some direct or peripheral involvement, such as Department of Environmental Quality, which holds the permit for the disposal site, again, Oregon Health Radiation Protection Services, which licenses the use and possession of radioactive materials within the state. We wanted to learn from other states' experience. Kentucky went through something like this a few years ago. So there was a period of a lot of conversation, of phone calls and emails. We talked with Chemical Waste Management, received documentation from them on a couple of different occasions. And that led to, on February 13th, our issuing of this notice of violation. Now, what we concluded was that Waste Management had not done their due diligence in correctly assessing whether or not the waste could be disposed of within the state of Oregon. So if you go back to the late 1970s, the state passed a prohibition on the disposal of radioactive waste. But because everything has some small amounts of radioactivity, you had to then set a threshold for what is and what is not. And our administrative rules do that, although they are admittedly complex. Additionally, our rules are structured in a way that if the landfill believes that they are meeting our requirements, they are not obligated to ensure that that is the case. Although we do receive questions on a periodic basis from other companies that do have questions about whether or not a waste stream they have may fit within Oregon's purview or not. We are continuing our investigation. Our current notice of violation is for a Class 1 violation, which comes without penalty, as it was our initial determination that Chemical Waste Management did not meet any of the criteria identified within our rules that would escalate it to where we could fine them. We do have the opportunity to revise that notice of violation depending on additional information that we might find, but that's where we're at right now. I know we've certainly heard in the past few weeks that people are upset with what happened, the fact that the waste has come to Oregon and disposed. We know that people are upset with our agency because they think we're going soft on the company. Let me just say, when we came into this, we had no plans of trying to go soft on anybody. We wanted to follow our rules and our statutes. And after considerable analysis and consultation with our attorneys, we are comfortable that our interpretation of the rules and statutes that we have is appropriate at this time. And that's really, any government agency is bound by the rules and authorities with which they have. We know that a lot of people want waste management to be punished. We know that people want to ensure that there is some deterrent moving forward. Some will not think of it as punishment, but there are requirements that we have insisted on waste management that will cost them some money. And Jeff will highlight in just a minute what those are, and perhaps Waste Management will talk about those as well. As far as a deterrent moving forward, this incident certainly identified for us some weaknesses within our existing statutes and existing rules, which really date back to the late 1970s, before this waste form was really prevalent, certainly way beyond the extensive fracking that we see today. We believe there is a need to clarify and strengthen our authorities, our prohibition against the disposal of radioactive waste within the state, our ability to investigate potential violations, direct corrective action, or direct preventative measures, such as additional monitoring or some other action. Some of this we can accomplish through rulemaking, and we are planning to begin that this year. Our statutes are really unique in that there is a reference within our statute to a specific rule that we would like to amend with the date it was originally adopted. So unless the legislature acts, we cannot amend that rule to the extent we would like to do that. We've had conversations with some legislators. Senator Devereaux introduced language just a few weeks ago. It was passed out of the Senate committee to the Senate floor. As you're aware, and as you mentioned, the legislature is not moving things right now. So there is a good likelihood that will not be passed this session. But if that is the case, we're well positioned to go to the legislature next year and look for those more substantive changes while we do begin the process of looking at amending our administrative rules. Again, just to repeat one thing, we are still investigating what's going on. We are still receiving new information. We still do have an opportunity to amend if we wish. I think it's important to mention Chemical Waste Management has been very cooperative. We have had numerous discussions with them, and hope that that will continue. So that's my comments, and Jeff, if you want to.
Okay. Thank you. So as Ken mentioned, the topics that I'd like to cover are the determination that there is no current risk to the public or workers, as well as to talk about the actions that are going to be occurring moving forward, the public process that we will be engaging in, and the analysis that we're asking Waste Management to perform. But first, what I'd like to talk about is what this waste actually is. When you hear radioactive waste or radioactive material, you think of something maybe coming from a power plant or production of weapons. What we are talking about here is naturally occurring radioactivity from the Earth's crust. We have underground, the rocks contain natural uranium and thorium, which can then decay into other products over time. Those include radium, which is one that we're concerned about here in this case, and radium further decays into radon, which is something that people often have to control in their basements or in their homes because it does contribute to lung cancer in the US. So the waste that we're talking about here is a product of oil and gas extraction and exploration. When water is injected into the subsurface, it can dissolve and grab uranium out of the ground, and then when that gets brought up to the surface, that can precipitate. And then if you'll allow me, what happens next is they filter that water so they can reuse it. This is called a filter sock. This is a clean one. Fans on. But you can get a dirty one that has been pulling these things out of the ground. That then becomes what we call technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material, or TNOR. So essentially, when you take something that's naturally occurring in the world and you concentrate it, now that becomes a waste that is potentially regulated by us. So we determined that the concentrations of waste do exceed our standards for what we would call radioactive waste or radioactive material. But when you talk about risk, what I want to communicate is it's important that there be a person who can be exposed and a method for exposure to occur. And 80% of the waste that was disposed consisted of dirty filter socks. There was also pipe scale or some sludges from the processes. That waste was transported either via rail car or via a covered truck. The concentrations of the waste were not high enough to require placarding from U.S. Department of Transportation. So we are confident that when you combine the covering of the trucks with the fact that the radioactivity was not high enough, that there would not have been a risk to people along the route. Once you get to the landfill itself, what we understand about the process is that the workers at the landfill work within pressurized cabins in their vehicles, which are separated from distance from the waste. And if they're outside their vehicles, they're wearing respiratory personal protective equipment. The way that you would become put at risk by this waste, you would either have to ingest it, so dust particles entering your body, or inhale it, such as radon gas, or if you were just too close to it, you can get what is called direct exposure or shine. Kind of like if you're too close to a fire, you can have some direct radioactivity. Because this waste now is buried, and the depths vary because it was disposed over a period of 3 years. It's a 36-acre area, 90 feet thick. What we've been told is the shallowest it could possibly be is about 7 feet from the surface. So that 7 feet of dirt provides direct shielding from radiation from that shine that you might get. It also prevents dust from getting into the air, so we don't worry about ingestion or inhaling dust particles. As far as radon is concerned, there are a couple of things there. One is that if radon is released in the subsurface, a lot of it would be re-trapped by soil above it. However, we have done some preliminary modeling of if you had a worker who was standing on top of that waste, which I understand would not happen because this isn't hazardous landfill, that the amount of radon that they would actually receive if they weren't wearing their PPE, et cetera, is minuscule, very, very low. So That covers the risk to workers. What we understand is that the nearest resident lives about 4 miles away. And so for the same reasons, you would have no exposure risk to radiation to the nearest resident. And when it comes to groundwater, I think as you'll hear from the waste management folks, the landfill itself would contain anything that might escape that we know today because it has multiple liners and a sump that collects leachate and handles it. So you put all that together and we are confident that there is no present risk to workers, public, or the environment. However, there are some decisions that need to be made going forward. First and foremost, does the waste have to go or could it stay? And what we are asking Waste Management to do is to produce 2 documents in one. One is a risk assessment that is going to more formally look at past, present, and potential future risk associated with this waste where it is now. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want there to be a rigorous technical analysis done. And then based on that risk assessment, we're asking them to perform a corrective action plan. That would include an analysis of 2 alternatives. One is to exhume it, to dig it up. The other one would be to close it in place. And we would like them to analyze those alternatives based on the same criteria that are used in the Superfund cleanup law. There are 9 criteria. I can go into further detail if you like. The next thing that we would want to understand is if the waste stays, what kind of new monitoring or other procedures would need to be put in place to ensure not only that there is not a future risk, but that we would know to look for it. That would be part of the package. And then the third piece that we want to see in this corrective action plan is a discussion of measures that the company would put into place to prevent reoccurrence of something like this happening again. We've had some preliminary discussions with them. We are waiting to see what they propose. So Waste Management is going to produce this document, the Risk Assessment Corrective Action Plan. They're going to submit it to us where we will verify it passes our technical muster, if you will. And then what we're going to do next is open it up for public review. It'll be a 30-day public review that can be extended if requested. And we will be inviting public comments on that. The thought also was that we would have another public meeting so that we could talk about what the report says and what the conclusions are. Within that report, Waste Management would be identifying what their preferred alternative is. So that's part of it as well. And then the outcome of that public process would be that we would be responding to public comments. We would accept or reject the proposal that is out there from Waste Management. So that's what I have to offer you. Thank you.
Do you have in terms of the time frame of what that process looks like, what does that, so people have a sense of like when those initial plans would come back and when that public comment would open?
Sure, thank you, good question. We've been talking with Waste Management. They currently are under a 30-day deadline to respond to our notice of violation. And we expect that as part of that response, they will give us a timeline of when to expect that first draft of the document. I understand they're gathering their technical resources to help them compile that report. What we've heard is sometime later this spring. From there, the public process would proceed, and I would imagine it would be a couple of months from there.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions for?
I do not.
Leslie?
I think most of mine are probably waste management.
Is there any, before we move on to waste, maybe I'll just open it up to the public as well. Does anybody have any questions of Department of Energy? Go ahead.
Question. You said you received a notice from someone in North Dakota in September 2019, and then you cut off the stream of waste, but you didn't say when that was. When was the stream cut off?
I think the initial notice was September 11th. It took a few days to verify that in fact waste was coming, and it was shut off by the 17th of September. It was almost immediate.
Go ahead.
Since this was kind of done in the darkness of night, and it's so innocent. I'm curious as to why it was done that way, and if it is, if this whole process is so innocent and this is not that detrimental, then why in the heck wasn't it kept where it was dug up? Why did they feel they had to send it out of state?
Sure. Thank you for the question. In 2016, North Dakota promulgated their own rules for T-norm wastes, these type of wastes. And they set limits for themselves about what they would accept. That includes for radium, which is the one that we also regulated, total radium not exceeding 50 picocuries per gram. That's 50 trillionths of a curie per gram. A majority of the waste, from what we understand of the data, would not have satisfied that requirement, so would not have been legal to dispose of in North Dakota. However, Idaho has a disposal facility that would have accepted the waste.
So
I'm
it
sorry,
was
did I answer your
done
question?
basically illegally, and as I said, under darkness of night, and nobody was notified until we received a phone call, an anonymous phone call from somebody. Is that correct?
That's essentially correct, yes. We were not aware of it until we received that phone call.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a way to know how far it could drift with wind blowing before it was buried?
That might be a better question for Waste Management regarding their processes. At the risk of saying something wrong, and please correct me, my understanding is that there's a bulldozer sitting right there ready to cover waste once it's deposited. So there would be a very limited amount of time for wind to pick something up.
That is possible.
Well, actually, sorry. Jim Denson, Waste Management, sorry about that. Once the waste is deposited in the landfill, the dozer operator pushes it up against the edge of the next lift that's in front of it. It could stay there for a week. But as you saw, the socks, those socks, the material that held the radioactivity were sediments that were trapped in the socks. So we really, I think the likelihood of dust blowing off or out of the socks would be pretty remote, but yeah.
David and then Caitlin.
Yeah, I'm quoting from Times Journal, an article about this occurrence, and it says, it is alleged that oil field waste logistics, and that's a subsidy, is that, did I hear that correct, of Waste Management? No. Who are they?
They were the company that hauled the waste from North Dakota to Arlington.
To Arlington. Okay, and it says here from the article, waste in unmarked containers by rail, and according to comments made by Waste Management staff, falsified documents and said the waste was legal to dump in Oregon. I guess my question is, if it was falsified, I don't understand why those people aren't being fined.
We don't believe that they did falsify the documents.
So this article is incorrect.
That portion
That
is,
portion
yes.
is incorrect.
Yes.
Steve, do you think that was incorrect?
That's what I had gotten from the Oregonian, and I did reach out to Oilfield Waste Logistics numerous times and haven't gotten anything back.
And so according to you, Steve's our editor, that is not incorrect.
No, after speaking with Department, we spoke on the phone with Department of Energy, and
Yeah.
they told me that the paperwork they received showed that it was just an oversight by Waste Management, that what they had provided was correct.
Okay.
What OWL provided was accurate. Right?
Yes.
Okay,
Caitlin.
thanks.
My question is, how come 5 months later we're just finding out about this? It feels like a violation in a way.
Well, as I indicated, we had those immediate priorities when we first found out. Not allow any more waste to come in, which was stopped immediately. Assess quickly if we could, if there was any risk. When we completed those, then we felt that we needed to fully understand what we might be able to do, as opposed to just saying, well, look what happened. we don't know where we're going with this. And it took time with consulting with all these different agencies and back and forth with Waste Management, working through the holiday season, everything else. It just takes some time to do that. We got to the point we felt we were comfortable in going public and saying, here's what happened, here's the actions we're taking.
Were the workers, the employees down there, were they aware of the environment that they were working in?
I will let Waste Management answer that question.
And we'd be happy to do that now, or we can do it in our presentations.
If it's part of your presentation.
Sure, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions? Steve, let's go.
You had mentioned that there's a site in Idaho, and I'm curious, from what I've been reading, radium has a half-life of like 1,600 years. This is likely very different than anything else that's being handled at Waste Management. I'm wondering, do these facilities that have a specialization in handling this waste, what's the difference between their facilities, their liners, their procedures than what Waste Management has?
Okay. So I'm not an expert on what the Idaho facility has. We deal a lot with the Hanford nuclear site up in Washington, and so I do have a lot of familiarity with that. My understanding of the chemical waste management facility is that it is a specially designed facility meant to contain hazardous chemical waste. Chemical waste, some will degrade over time and some won't. So they actually could be persistent longer than radioactivity. And so there are requirements to things such as a double liner system, a cap when you're finished to prevent water from getting in, because water is what moves waste. Water is what allows waste to get out in the environment. And if you can control that, then the theory goes you can control the waste itself. It's a RCRA, I'm going to get technical, sorry. It's a RCRA Subtitle C landfill, the hazardous waste facility here, which is one of the more stringent design types you can have. There is a large disposal facility at Hanford called the Environmental Restoration Disposal Facility, ERDIF, and it has very similar design characteristics to the Arlington landfill, and it's a similar dry environment, and so there are some similarities there. It is yet to be determined when we get to the risk assessment and the corrective action plan. I think that we will really test out what the long-term risk could be. Personally, I don't anticipate there being great issues.
Other questions?
I did. Okay, we've manifested this, we're back in North Dakota, come across several states with it, and all these states allow this stuff to be transported. Your first responders, usually when you gotta have a placard saying what's in the container. If there's a fire, or you have to respond to a train wreck or a truck crash, the stuff's manifested. How does it get here? And people aren't aware that it's in there, and then when it gets there, you don't read it to see what it is before you put it in the ground, you know? There's a lot of people for waste management that's in trouble is what I see here, you know?
The state of North Dakota provided us tracking information from the waste because they do require any T-norm waste leaving their state to be tracked. That includes readings of how radioactive the waste is. Sure. However, as we said before, the waste itself was not radioactive enough to require a placarding from Department of Transportation because naturally occurring radioactive material does not require a placard until it reaches a pretty high threshold, and this was all below that.
Okay, so what we have is not all that dangerous. It's a natural material come out of the ground that we're putting back in the ground, but we just need to care properly as far as covering it so that nobody gets into it. That's basically where we're at.
Well, let me just say one thing, is that the restrictions within Oregon's laws are very tight in this respect.
Okay.
Because the intent is that Oregon would not be a recipient of waste for disposal, of radioactive waste. The site in Idaho, there's another one in Colorado. They have different laws, they have different requirements. But again, this is, it is a big deal because our law was violated. But in terms of the relative risk of this material, it is relatively low. And that's why it's important, though, to understand in terms of where it is now and what potentially could happen in the future.
Okay, so we've educated Waste Management as to how to deal with it when it gets here. Are we still going to continue to receive it?
No.
Are we going to accept it in Oregon?
No.
Because you've already said we're not supposed to be in the first place, so
Correct.
we're just going to deal with what we have now, and North Dakota will get trained on sending it to Oregon.
They've been told.
Is there any way that we can demand that it be removed from the land? This might be a question for Waste Management. Be removed and taken to Idaho or something at North Dakota's expense and not ours?
If I may, one of the alternatives we're asking them to really analyze is exactly that. We would like them to do a comparative analysis of digging it up versus leaving it there. I think there would need to be some consideration of relative risk, and they can talk about that further, about the proposition of digging back into a hazardous waste landfill.
And I think one of my major concerns, I grew up next door to Hanford, okay?
Oh.
They thought they had it all figured out, none of this was ever gonna leach into the Columbia River, et cetera, and look what's happened. We've
Right.
got a cleanup going on over there for decades, and probably a few more decades to come. So I think my concern is, we don't know what this is gonna do eventually. But there's no guarantee that it's not going to do something bad or get into some water or eventually, and I'm probably not talking until 100 or 200 years from now, but I've got grandkids that I'm worried about and their children and so on and so forth. So I would like a really strong analysis done to see where we stand and what eventually could happen to this.
One of the things I'm interested most is our uncertainty about the future.
Sure.
And when we provide comments on Hanford documents, we're talking 1,000, 10,000 years in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I am thinking in similar terms here.
Okay. Just want to bring that up.
Other questions? Go ahead in the back.
Yeah, so I think we have two things that we want to get clear. One of them is who's responsible. The DOE says Waste Management says North Dakota. Well, I think what DOE puts in regulations without representation, what I mean by that is that if you have regulations that you're not looking after, if that guy from North Dakota never called here, we'd have still been dumping it here.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have been dumping it here for the next 50 years maybe, without knowing. So where's the regulation on, or where's the implementation of the DOE's responsibility to monitor that? There has to be someone that's out there monitoring that. We're not going to do it as residents. We're relying on the DOE. It's easy for you to put in regulations, but when you don't have representation on your regulations and you don't have any follow-up on it, what good is a regulation? It's kind of like putting a speed limit on the interstate at 70 miles an hour and not giving anybody a ticket for going 90. I mean, we just don't do that. So I think a lot of that responsibility falls on the DOE. And, it's always pass the buck. And then the second thing that we need to be concerned about is exactly what was just said, the long-term effects. Kids and grandkids that are going to be growing up here that might be affected from the radiation. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to be a alarmist or anything, but it could happen. And we won't know. And the people who are in place right now, you guys sitting here, you over here, us sitting out here, may not be here when we see the effects of that. And I think a fund needs to be set up so that we have a fund set up for any future problems that we have with increase in cancer in this county because of radiation and things like that. These are just general things. I don't have any definitive things right now that I can put my finger on, but these are the things that we need to be looking at. And there's definitely going to be some long-term things that are going to happen that none of us are going to know about, or we're all going to be gone. Half-life is 1,000 years, or whatever you said it is, then it could be a long-term thing. And we've seen that at other waste sites 50 years ago that are just affecting communities today where they built housing on top of them and all that stuff. So I just think we need to go about this cautiously and slowly and answer the questions, not avoid them.
Thank you. That's what we're trying to do.
Other questions or comments from the audience? All right, I also wanted to mention Jenny, who's in the back, who's with Department of Energy, has said she's got For those who want emailed updates about how this process unfolds and all those kinds of things, she's got an email listserv. So if you're interested in being sort of up to date on notices that are coming out from Department of Energy, go see her and make sure you get her your email address so that you can be connected with this information that's coming out. If there's any more follow-up questions based on what you guys heard? Okay. I think it's time for waste management. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you, Teresa, for your help. Wow, it feels really dark.
That's the deal where we keep being kept in the dark.
I'm going to apologize for this cough I have. I've had this cough for 8 months. It's an allergy cough. I've not been to China. And for turning my back on you, but welcome members of the community, and thank you for being here. It's a really important conversation for us, and we're glad to see you here.
So if you guys could just state your names for the record so folks watching on YouTube know who we're talking to.
Absolutely.
And then we'll go right into your presentation.
For the record, I am Jackie Lang with Waste Management. I'm here in my capacity as Senior Manager for Strategic Engagement and Public Affairs for Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Denson. I'm the Area Environmental Protection Manager for Waste Management. Chem Waste Landfill I've had responsibility over that facility for about 6 years now.
So give us a shout if you can't hear us.
Yeah.
Good morning, Judge Farrar, Commissioner Wilkins, Commissioner Weatherall. It's good to see you again. It's always good to see you. The beginning point, I'm going to ask Caitlin, are you available to help me with the slider? Here's the board, and I'll just tell you when to go ahead. So we're going to sit on this one for a while. So the beginning of this conversation is Waste Management's commitments and values. As employees, we talk about it in very simple terms. We do the right thing the right way. What does this mean? It means putting people first, and it means success with integrity. When we talk about people first, we talk about taking care of each other on the work site, making sure that we have the right PPE, making sure that employees have the right kind of safety training. We talk about it with our customers, taking care of our customers, and taking care of our community partners, like our longtime community partners in Gilliam County and the city of Condon and the city of Arlington. When we talk about success with integrity, we commit to being accountable, honest, worthy of your trust, ethical, and compliant in all that we do. It also means bringing core values to everything that we do. Priorities change, core values remain the same. They are deeply rooted and unchangeable. They are embedded in who we are and what we bring to our work every day. Inclusion, diversity, customers, safety, and protecting the environment. These are the foundational elements that unite us and a key part of how we approach our work at Chem Waste Management every day. We have a very brief presentation for you today. We want to talk about the notice of violation, what happened, and what we've done to make sure that it won't happen again. We'll talk about the site, how the site is designed, the environmental protection systems that are in place. And finally, we'll talk about what we're doing to keep you and our employees and the community informed. Let's start with leadership. Bob Mulholland is with us today in the room. Bob is our Senior District Manager at the CWM site. Jim Denson is here at my side. Jim's our Environmental Protection Manager, and myself. I'm going to talk first about the notice of violation, just the way we talked to our employees about it. We've done 2 complete rounds of employee briefings. Lots of questions, taking time to listen to employees' concerns and get back to them to answer the questions as best as we can. Bottom line, this shouldn't have happened. It's a serious violation, and it's not in keeping with our commitment to doing the right thing the right way. As everyone at Chem Waste knows, and you know, this industry is highly regulated. And a key piece of this regulatory environment is the waste profile process. It's a multi-step analysis and verification process. A profile is required for every single waste, and this profile process has to be completed before any decision is made about whether or not the waste is acceptable at the site. What we know about this particular situation is that something went wrong with that process. When we learned there was a problem, we immediately stopped accepting the waste. We moved quickly to review our internal processes and improve them to prevent this from happening again. What we've done is added to our controls. In addition to our normal waste profile process, we now contract with a technical expert to review the waste profiles for these types of materials specifically. Moving forward, we will also be requesting additional reviews from the Oregon Department of Energy for these types of materials. Now I'd like to invite Jim to talk to us a bit about the site and the environmental protection systems.
Is it okay if I stand up?
That's fine by
Okay.
me if you're more comfortable.
I do. Hi, I'm Jim Denson again, Environmental Protection Manager for Waste Management. And the facility at Arlington started in the mid-'70s, started taking waste. It's approximately 22 acres in size at this point. We have about 11,000 acres of what we call buffer land. It's essentially distance from us and any person, place, or thing, if you can. The site is well suited for where it's at as a hazardous waste landfill. It's in a very arid climate. Groundwater is very deep. The groundwater that we monitor normally for the landfill doesn't move very far, and the way that it moves is away from the river and onto a bluff, essentially. So as you heard Jeff talk about Hanford having similar containment structures, this landfill is a RCRA Subtitle C landfill versus a regular MSW landfill.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you for
Yes.
this? Would you please tell us what RCRA and
Sure.
MSW means? There's people out here
Yeah,
that
I'm
really
sorry.
don't
Yeah, I
understand.
do that all the time.
Yeah.
I apologize. So RCRA means Resource Recovery and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So in, I don't remember the date, maybe David does, but it was
Late 70s.
late 70s. Rules were put in place to make sure solvents were dumped on the ground or other things. There were controls on hazardous waste. So RCRA has worked as an act, in our opinion, because we steadily see lower volumes of hazardous waste coming to our hazardous waste facilities because people are not creating it, number one, as much as they were. They're recycling some of it and just, so RCRA has worked. It reduces the amount of hazardous waste that's created and that we have to manage at this facility. MSW stands for Municipal Solid Waste. That's what you throw away in your garbage can every day from your house. We have another facility next door to the hazardous waste facility, very large, MSW Subtitle D facility. But this facility that we're talking about, Chemical Waste Management in Arlington. It's a fully permitted what's called a TSDF. That's another acronym, sorry. It's Transfer Storage Disposal Facility. That's how the rules work for RCRA. And so the facility can transfer, store, and dispose, treat, store and dispose of hazardous wastes. Just because a customer of ours gives us a hazardous waste, under the rules, there are things called land disposal restrictions. So things have to be treated in a manner to reduce the concentrations or bind up the concentrations of the contaminants that we would eventually put into the landfill. Complicated process, a lot of stuff goes on at that facility. If you're interested, call Jackie and we'll get you a tour so you see. It's always good for folks that don't understand what we do to come to the facility. So, in any case, the landfill itself has a double liner system and 3 what we call leachate collection sumps. The primary, secondary, and tertiary sumps is what they're called. They are controls to manage any possible issues that would arise. So if the first liner is breached, the second liner is going to catch it, and if the second liner is breached for some reason, then the third liner is going to catch it. Now, we know as landfill professionals that the most likely place for a landfill to leak is the lowest point where the leachate in the landfill accumulates. Leachate, sorry. Leachate is rainwater or water or liquids, moisture in the waste that filter down through the waste mass, contact the first liner system, and then that liner is sloped to drain to the first sump, if you will. The leachate's then collected because we have rules requiring us to not have what we call head-on liner. I'm probably getting really too deep for you guys here, but sorry. So leachate's collected out of the sumps. We have leak detection sumps in the secondary that tell us if the primary liner is leaking, and in the third line sump that tells us if the second liner is leaking. So very safe, very safe landfill. We also, for each, in the area of the sumps, if you look at it from high in the air, we have groundwater monitoring wells that are called, or what we call down gradient of the sumps. So the theory is if we have a leak or a problem, it's going to go the direction of the flow of the groundwater underneath the ground. So those groundwater wells are located in strategic places near the sumps. We've been monitoring just under 200 wells on the site since the early 70s. Really haven't identified any significant or anomalous issues in the groundwater.
And how often do they monitor each one of the wells?
Good question. So we monitor the groundwater in compliance with our permit twice a year. The groundwater flow, it's for groundwater to move from here, 100 feet, it takes many, many years. So the site is sited in a manner that very protective of the groundwater supply. Once we're done filling in the landfill, we have a cap that goes on top of the landfill. That cap keeps, as Jeff and Ken said, it keeps the liquids from entering the landfill and getting to the leachate system. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions? Sir?
I have a question.
Sure.
Have any of the liners been breached?
Not to our, no, there's not, the way we would know that is we would see liquids or stuff, leachate in the secondary liner or the tertiary liner, and we don't see that.
Are there any air monitors?
No, there are no air monitors. Sir?
Is this the same design of each at the waste and at Kim Waste for your?
No, the MSW landfill, Columbia Ridge landfill only has one liner.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the DOE, or comment that I made to the DOE, and that would be that, do you feel that there might be other breaches of any of the limits that are allowed out there over the last 35, 40 years almost now? 50 years? It's
40.
been there? That there have been any breaches since then that you don't know about, since there's been no enforcement out there to detect any of this stuff? Just because there wasn't someone that gave a phone call from North Dakota doesn't mean that this might not have happened before. And what precautions can we take in the future to prevent anything like this from happening?
Good question. Let me see if I can answer that. So we are regulated by, mainly by the Department of Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They are tasked with the rules, managing the rules for hazardous waste in Oregon. Oregon visits and inspects our site regularly. I about said monthly. I think that's pretty close, but I don't want to tell you wrong in a meeting like this. Very regularly.
Surprise inspections, including
they're all-
surprise inspections.
Includes surprise inspections. And then every 2 years, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality along with EPA come in together and do inspections at the site. Generally, the inspections of the site start with records review. Probably the easiest way for us to mess up is with records. There's a lot of rules in what we do, and they're very meticulous. And so we have humans doing these things, and sometimes they can make mistakes.
Okay, so we've had this for 4 years.
I'm sorry?
We've had this out there for 4 years, and it hasn't been detected by the department.
Okay.
What is it?
Yeah.
Environmental quality.
Understand your concern.
Yeah, so it hasn't been detected through that process. And what I'm saying is, maybe a new process needs to be put in place, because if we're not picking it up with that process, then how much else have we missed along the way? And
So-
it's not a very efficient or protective measure. And I think it needs to be changed.
I hear you. I hear you. And I think you heard Ken and Jeff saying they're working hard to change their rules so they can be more protective.
And we have added to our controls. So
We've added to our controls too.
We've added to our controls. I mean, when we're
The
doing
hard
some-
part about some of this stuff is everything is radioactive, as you heard the agency say. It's just the level of radioactivity that that the waste has. We did not have good controls on looking at radioactivity in our system. We essentially, our answer to someone that said, you know, we want to send you some low-level radioactive material like you take at Hanford, we'd say, no, sorry, we can't take that. Right? This this, I don't want to minimize the level of radioactivity that was accepted. It was unacceptable. Our processes didn't catch it. We've changed those processes immediately after we were told that, after we identified what happened and understood why we missed it, right? We added a technical expert that's an expert in radiation, and in discussion with the Department of Energy, we're now adding, if we ever see anything like this again, if it has radioactivity, it'll go to the department and they will review it before we're allowed to accept it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys are trying to do the best you can under the
Yeah.
regulations that you have. I'm
Right.
just saying that maybe the regulations need to be increased a little bit or make them a little bit better so
Right.
that we don't have this again. We don't, nobody here sitting here wants to have this happen again, I'm sure.
And I'll tell you, neither do we. I hope you feel my sincerity when I say that. I don't ever want to have to get up in front of anybody ever again and say, we screwed up and we took some radiation. Yes, sir.
The fact that there is now the radiation in there, is that going to change the regulation for the capping layer that is going to be put on it once the landfill is?
So that's a really good question. I think that will be assessed in not only the risk analysis plan that we're doing for the agency, and the corrective action plan. So the way, my understanding is the first time I've ever done this, so you have to forgive me, but the way I understand it is that we look at the risk for not only now, but in many, many years from now, people that could, buy a house across the street, that's not there now. All different kinds of aspects, and then we assess the risk. We look at that risk and say, okay, how can we reduce that risk, right? If there's a significant, or I might explain this. Okay, we've never done it before. Sorry. So what we've done is we've hired some very high-level, very respected technical experts that do this for a living. They do the risk analysis. They have done the corrective action plans. As the agency said, we're a little bit different from the Kentucky example you heard the agency talk about. That was an MSW landfill like the other landfill. This is a hazardous waste landfill. So, we have to assess the risk to human health and the environment based on removing hazardous waste versus just moving garbage, right? We're not there yet. It's going to take us a lot of time and a lot of money to get figured out what should happen in the end. I think the message that we want you to know is it's going to be a fairly open process, right? We're going to give the agency the risk assessment and corrective action plan. There'll be discussions with them along the way. They've already given us some bounds on how they want to see parts of the risk assessment done. So we got that the other day. Our consultants are working on that. We're going to do this with them, and then once they're in agreement that they're happy with that, Oregon Health will be reviewing this too. Once they're in agreement, then we'll come to you, right, as a community, and say, here's the best science we have, and this is what we're planning to do. And we want to hear your comments, just like you said, for maybe long-term care, right, or whatever that might be. But until we have the risk analyzed and really understand the risk for long-term, we can't make those decisions right now. It would be like, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's premature to recommend this, but I think there should be a citizens advisory board that's put in place that also attends these meetings, or at least has some kind of briefing on the meetings that you guys have, so that the advisory board, they may have some situations in the local community that maybe the DOE is not aware of, or you guys aren't aware of, or something like that, that, maybe a new housing complex going in somewhere or something like that.
Gotcha.
That might be of importance to the community. And I think that maybe that might be something we might need to take up with the county to find out if we can get something like that organized. It may not have to be something, it may be premature right now to do that, but maybe as we go on with this at a future date, it might be a good thing.
So we do have a Citizens Advisory Council. It's for the other landfill. But we're certainly open to that. We're going to be as open and transparent as we can be. There's some things that we don't know everything yet, and I don't want to stand up and say, this is the way it was, and then find out 2 weeks from now that that really wasn't the way it was, or there were other things that were in the way. So I want to make sure when I tell you something, you can believe it.
Jim, I have a question.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Sorry.
The profile approval process, is it still completed on site?
No.
How long has it not been?
I think we centralized that late 2000.
And so who's looking at that analytical, and where are you getting that analytical? And
Very
is there
good
any
question.
sampling being done before the waste is, the profile's being accepted? Are you, and is there sampling going on after the waste starts to come? I know those were processes that used to be.
Really good questions, yes. So for the waste approval process, we've somewhat centralized our approval process in that we have a dedicated group of folks. There's 3 here in Oregon. We have several across the United States. They're experts in reviewing both hazardous and non-hazardous waste profiles. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. To your question about analysis and sampling, et cetera. So when a customer for a customer to be able to bring a waste to us, right? They, under the rules, are responsible for characterizing their waste, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily always apply for radiation. Okay, I just want to tell you that now. But when we get a profile, our waste analysis group looks at the profile and says, okay, this is what they say the waste is. This is petroleum contaminated soil from a spill of a diesel spill somewhere. Okay, so there is a set requirement for analysis for these diesel spills. We have to have analysis for petroleum hydrocarbon, depending on if it's an old spill, we could ask for lead testing. So the generator is generally understands what what our requirements are. If they're repeat for the waste that they generate, they give us analytical. The analytical is reviewed. In the case of hazardous waste, it's not always straightforward. It's very nuanced. I don't want to get too deep into this, but there are things called underlying hazardous constituents that kick in at certain places. So our waste approval managers understand these rules and the regulations. And then if they don't see enough analytical, they ask for it. They say, we can't approve this waste until you send us this lab analysis. So once the waste approval manager is happy, or not happy, but is
Meets the
confident
requirements.
and meets the permit, They have to look at not only, they want to know where it's going. So in the case of Arlington, they have to look at that waste based on our permit, which is about that big. And they have to understand the permit and say, okay, this is acceptable at Chem Waste Arlington, whatever the waste is. And we take the universe of hazardous waste at that facility, right? I know that's kind of a scary word, but if it's hazardous, if under the rules it's hazardous, unless it's a bomb or some certain gases, we can take it there, manage it safely, and dispose of it or manage it in another manner. Could be shipped off-site. So once it's approved, the generator gets the approval package. For Arlington, because it's typically hazardous waste, there's a lot of forms that they have to fill out. A waste shipment manifest. That manifest has to be exact. And as I said, there's a lot of document errors that we catch on those. We have to have what's called an LDR form, land disposal restriction form, for that waste, and that package of information goes to, along with the waste, to the facility. When it arrives at the facility, if it's hazardous waste, we look at, our people look at the manifest. There's a profile number, approved profile number on it. We look at the profile in the system, print out what sampling requirements we're required to do under our permit. And then it's handed to a sampler, and the sampler goes out and samples.
Was this waste sampled or visual?
This waste was visual.
Which met the requirements.
Which met the requirements.
So a fingerprint sample at the lab was not required.
Was not required.
With this waste because of how it was profiled.
Right. Sir.
So let's follow on what you just said.
Yep.
So the cars from North Dakota had a profile.
Yes.
That were brought here.
Yes.
Did those profiles say that they had radioactive waste in them?
No. Oh, wait.
So that North Dakota lied
No.
on the
No.
profile.
So
No.
I talked with
So
Steve
we're
about
not
this.
getting anywhere here.
Thank you. I talked with Steve about this earlier. We were working hard to gather a lot of information in a quick period of time. And what we could see at the very beginning is that it didn't make sense. Something went wrong in that process. And it was unclear whether the generator provided accurate and full information or whether our systems were not rigorous enough to ask the right questions or understand the information that was being provided to us. So we don't know exactly what happened with that, and we're not pointing a finger at that North Dakota company saying anything specific about what they did or didn't do. What we're saying is that we have a responsibility to get the process right, and we didn't.
So the profiles are available, and they would be available to the DOE if they wanted to inspect those?
They're looking at that data, yes.
And would also be available to the public?
I don't think we do the profiles are not public
I think
information.
that's the key, the profile. Did the profile say it was radioactive or wasn't it? And if it did, then you took it.
We took
as
it, and that's why we got a
radioactive.
notice of
And if it
violation.
didn't say that, then there's no violation on your part. You're
No.
clear. It didn't say it was radioactive. I think it's all depending on that profile, and I think that's what the evidence shows here.
So we're not standing here saying we didn't make a mistake. We made mistakes. And we've corrected, we think, we're sure, or within reason, sure that we've corrected those types of mistakes that were made. And going forward, not only have we corrected those review type mistakes that were made, we're going to ask Oregon DOE for their opinion also on whether or not we got that decision correct. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've added 2 new layers. This independent
Yes.
technical consultant with years of experience with radioactive materials, and we will be requesting additional review for anything that looks like those any materials that, of this type, will be
We don't get
requesting
a
that
lot
additional
of
review.
requests
from
for
Department.
this type of material to be disposed at Arlington.
How do you
Hang on
analyze
just
your...
one second. I think you.
So is there a threshold or a benchmark, since we've established that radiation is naturally occurring in a lot of stuff to different levels? Is there a benchmark on a level measured in joules or something that says you can accept it if it's below this benchmark? Or is that not even tested?
I'm going to defer to the
Jeff?
the gentleman in the back.
Sure.
Jeff?
So our rules do specify there are concentration-based limits where if you are below a certain concentration, then it is not considered radioactive material. And so we do have a number for radium-226, which is one of the chief ones that is involved in this one, of 5 picocuries per gram as kind of our default threshold. The nuance here is that back when this law was made in the 70s, we did recognize that there were several industries in Oregon and elsewhere that produce things like bricks, refractory bricks, have naturally occurring radioactive material in them, or big piles of sand. If you're going to be refining metals, you extract the metal that you want out of that pile of sand, and in the leftover pile, if that had any natural uranium or thorium in it, then has technically concentrated what's left over in that pile. So there needed to be a system to deal with these case-by-case issues, and there is a separate process. It's called the Pathway Exemption that can be case-by-case, looking at a particular waste and whether it would pose an unacceptable threat to human health or whether it would leach into the environment. And there have been cases over the years where people have tried to go that process with us. That was not pursued in this case, and so we defaulted to the 5 picocurie per gram limit.
And
do we know what the concentration was once you did test it? If 5 picocuries is okay, was it 10 or
The waste
1,000?
that was accepted?
Yeah.
So we have...
No, it probably varied from carload to carload.
Exactly. It did vary from carload to carload. There were annual waste profiles that were provided to Waste Management that had laboratory analytical data. And in all of the ones that were provided, it did exceed 5. I can't quote you the exact ones. I think the highest one was maybe around 90 of radium-226. We also have data from the state of North Dakota that was measured in some different ways, and so you have to do a bit of transforming of the data to make it all the same. And if you try to figure out what is the average of radium there across all the waste that was taken, it's in the 70 to 90 range, I'm confident saying, for radium-226.
So Jeff, how would you compare that, how would you characterize that relative to other radiation that exists in the environment? How does that level of radiation?
It really depends, and that's kind of the rub.
Yeah.
You know.
There's all different types of radiation, just like there's smaller fires and bigger fires, as Jeff said.
So in some places in Oregon, you're required in a real estate purchase to do a radon test for radon gas, which is naturally occurring in the soil. And if it exceeds the threshold, then you have to put basically just a fan inside the crawl space that blows it out. You know what that threshold is?
That is 4 picocuries per liter in air. So again, you get weird measurements.
Okay.
So it's kind of funky there because it's a gas. It's coming out.
So the Oregonian had said that the amount measured was 350 times the amount allowable in Oregon, which is 5 picocuries. Is that not accurate?
They grabbed onto the hottest load of the whole 3 years, which was about 1.5 tons out of the 1,284 tons total.
Okay.
And it had a measured radioactivity of 1,700 picocuries per gram in that one load. But if you consider the whole load together and consider spreading it out on land and then building a house on it, that's when it becomes a meaningful risk analysis, not just one load.
And we don't build houses on top of hazardous wasteland.
Sure.
And we also, I think it's important because Caitlin asked earlier about employees. Our procedures are very much guided by this idea that we want to minimize the exposure to the hazardous material, to the active part of the landfill. And that's what PPE, personal protection equipment, is all about. That's what the respirators are about. We talked about pressurized cabins. Actually, pressurized cabins are not required at this site, but respirators are, and everybody is trained.
That's my fault. I told the agency that we had pressurized cabs. We have them at the Subtitle D facility, but not at this. Well, we have some pressurized cabs at Chem Waste, but not the one in the landfill.
So our fault in giving you some bad information there, but I just want to clarify it for this group because everybody knows the PPE requirements. Everybody is trained on them, rigorous. Our safety programs are rigorous and constant. And day in and day out, our work plans and how we manage the waste is very much driven by minimizing exposure. Yes?
So the PPE that they wear would suffice for radioactive material, even though they didn't know they were managing radioactive material?
Well, I'm going to ask Jim for some help here, but it's not just about the PPE. It's about time and distance and shielding. So if you build your house on top of the radioactive material and you spend years living there, that's a different scenario. If your role is to get a visual inspection of the waste as it's going into the landfill, and that's a part of our process, you get the visual inspection and you move away from the site. You're minimizing the time. Jeff?
Sure. I'd like to help if I can.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Something similar happened in Kentucky a few years ago, where 1,150 tons of waste was disposed in municipal landfills, so a similar volume. The average there of radium was 160, so higher. The risk assessment that was performed there, which was performed by, I understand, the same people who are going to be doing the work here, found that if the same worker had been outside of their truck attending all 92 of the disposals that had occurred over that multi-year period, the maximum dose that they projected they would have received in their body was 4 millirem total. The average person gets about 360 millirem per year just living on Earth. If you lived in Spokane, you'd be closer to 1,200, 1,600 because it's a higher radon area, for instance. So it's variable. And people try to equate a millirem number to a chance of getting cancer in your lifetime. It's an imperfect science because we still don't have exact certainty. I've heard figures that every 2 millirem is a 1 in a million chance. So just to put some things into perspective.
And let me just add, see if I could answer your question about the PPE. As you heard the agency say, the route of exposure, what we call the route, how a person gets exposed to this waste, is through breathing it in. That gets in your lungs, it sticks there, stuff like that. Our people all wear respirators that are very protective for not only dusts, but mists and acids and everything else. They do not, I guess I liken it to a nuclear power plant. You see the people with the silver stuff, they don't wear that type of PPE. It's really not required because the route of exposure for this waste is really for breathing it in. And that is covered very highly with the respiratory PPE that they wear.
Yes.
Back to the public knowledge, would the money that you made off these cars be public knowledge?
It wouldn't.
We can't
we
get
don't.
the question back here.
So the question was, would it be public information how much money was paid to Waste Management to take this material? I can tell you that we're going to pay, it's going to cost the company, it's already costing the company way more to deal with this notice of violation and to build the corrective action plan so that we make sure it doesn't happen again than the revenue that ever came from this waste. So this is the hard way to make money. We're not making any money. It's a very expensive process when you don't get the process right.
Definitely not about the money.
Yeah?
Is all this material that's contained in one cell, or is it spread?
That's a really good question. And I just got the answer to that yesterday. So the landfill, I don't really have a picture of the landfill, but you can think of the landfill as a square, right? Part of that landfill, we start in one side of the landfill, and then we start, when that gets to a certain level, we start, go to the next level, the next one, and keep going, and then we go to the north of the next cell. So the closest, currently, the closest load that we accepted and placed in disposal landfill, it's within 7 feet of the surface, 6.8. That load, by the time we fill the landfill up, because we put waste in it all the time and it gets higher and higher and higher, that load will be about 100 feet under other waste. Okay. There's another load, if you look at it in the reverse, that is 17 feet below the ground right now. It's at a higher elevation in the landfill because it was put in when that area of the landfill was higher. So then if we look at it from where it would be at our final elevation, the final elevation, we're about 15 feet away from the top of the landfill now, plus 17 feet. So the analysis that we did in the beginning was based on 3 feet. Okay. So as Jeff said, we think even into the future, this waste is going to be buried very deeply in the landfill where it will cause health risks.
But it's spread out.
It is.
Yes.
Multiple locations.
65 different locations, that's correct.
And you can identify each of these locations, you know
Yes.
exactly what that
Yes.
stuff is.
Well, I don't want to say exactly. So let me, the landfill, when we dispose of waste in the landfill, let's say this is the waste. Our people don't stand on the waste, right? They're off a little bit. And then we have a grid system at the top of the landfill, there's signs, right? So we have a person that looks at the waste, eyeballs the signs that he sees, and gives us a grid this way, and then does the same thing that way. So we kind of know where that is. Those grids are 25 feet. And typically, it's very hard to see the signs. And so it could be 50 foot or 25 foot this way or 25 foot that way. And then on the elevation, we have what we call a lift. What that means is we place a lift of waste in the landfill. Our lifts in this landfill are about 7 to 8 feet tall. So the lift is given an alphabetical term. It's on lift L, right? So we translated all of that into a real 3D model in a down to the millimeter, right? There's inherent error because you got somebody looking at it, maybe making an error both ways. And then, so we know generally within about we'll say 50 by 50 by 7 foot location. So as part of this review, we tried to be conservative, right? So when the guy said it was on lift L, we didn't use the bottom of lift L. We moved it up, the waist up 3.5 feet, okay? Because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any waste closer than 3 feet in that scenario. So we can't say exactly.
That's the long answer to exactly.
Are there other questions?
I have one more question. Commissioner? The mode of transportation, can we be more specific? Did they come on, they just said rail cars? Was that a
That's
20-foot
not-
closed container?
No, so it did not come on
Chocolate
rail.
cups? Did not come by rail?
We don't think it came on rail. We've looked at all the manifests. It came over the road in what they call walking floor trailers. Okay. I've been asked this question 8 times today. How long is the trailer? Because the risk people want to know how far away the person was. I can't tell you. We don't pay that. I don't think we get a lot of trucks in and out of the facility every day. I can tell you it's between 40 feet and 54 feet long. Right. The trailer had a tarp, and the reason I know that is because when I talked to the sampler, the guy that does the visual inspection, he said, I have to wait for the guy to untarp his load. It's a hydraulic tarp that goes over the top of the trailer.
Catherine, in the back.
Just to follow up on 2 of them. So one is, you had an allowable limit not to have a Department of Transportation placard when it left North Dakota. What about Idaho, Washington, and Oregon? How could that have not had a placard, at least when it came on Oregon roads, if it was not allowed? And my other follow-up question is on Kay Lynn's. When she asked the question about, we didn't know until February. Not only did we not know until February, we all found out from the Oregon news. This happened in our county, and it happened that it could have been a serious consequence to our residents. That your employee, you're our biggest employer, thank you, that you're our biggest employer. So we're concerned, I'm concerned, that the method of letting us know was from the media in Portland and not from you at Waste Management, from you Department of Energy to let us know in Gilliam County that this was occurring. So I'm hoping that when all your processes are done, the notification of such a violation is known sooner to the residents that it may affect than the residents that it's not affecting.
I hear your concern. I really do, and I sympathize. I have the same concerns. We don't wake up every day and say, hey, I think I'm going to expose people to a problem. That's not our job. My job is to keep that from ever happening. Okay. So let me take the DOT piece, right? So in most states, DOT hazardous material transport is regulated by the federal government, right? So that means they're fairly consistent across states. I can never remember if it's interstate or intrastate, but the limit for DOT not requiring a placard is it has to be under 2,000 picocuries per gram. All of these loads were. So from state to state to state, there were no placards required because it's a fairly consistent rule across the United States. Okay. Secondly, I hear your concern about us not notifying you. Before the notice of violation came out and was posted by the Oregon DOT, we had conversations with our employees, or part of the community, the judge, and a few other people.
County staff.
Some county staff, not all. There's always going to be somebody left out, right? And Oregon, maybe you can, are you want to talk about the timing of the notice?
In what respect?
So we were going about notifying people, right? Oregon made their notification to everybody, right? We don't have that method. Now, one thing we did learn is there are several people in the community and the Citizen Advisory Committee that should be notified when we have a problem like this, right? We missed that, right? It was
It wasn't because we were hiding it from you, it's just the timing of the release of all the data. So I think we can get better at that. And certainly, there's a list of folks that are on our address list for any permit changes, any issues. We can work with that list, and if you want to be on that list, please let us know. We'll get you on the list. Just don't decline the email because we never get it back.
And I can tell you that we're going to do a better job of that in the future. So we've always had a Chem Waste website. We've just updated it with all the information about the NOV. Let's go all the way to the, oh, there it is. I just can't really see it. But the website is there, the drawing is there, there's a CWM update, and our commitment to the county, to our employees, and the communities that we're going to keep that updated, and we're also going to keep employees informed. There'll be some regular employee briefings.
I don't know who was.
Let's go with Tom and then.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked there for 10 years, I probably already knew all that. But every truck that comes in there is placarded.
If it's
It may not have
hazardous
been
waste.
placarded for radon or whatever, but it was placarded when it came in.
So these trucks were not, because it was not hazardous waste.
Why did we take it
Why was it
there?
coming to a hazardous waste facility?
Right.
Yeah. Something went wrong in that process.
Well, so, I mean, there's a lot of things in the rule that allow generators to be excluded from a waste being hazardous waste.
For T-norm, right?
Huh?
From T-norm.
No, not for T-norm. So we're talking
Broader
about.
hazardous waste universe.
Yeah. So these wastes, under the rules, have what they call an E&P. I think it's
Exploration and production.
exploration and production. They have a exemption, in some cases, under the rule, under RCRA. So the generator of these types of wastes, if they meet those exemptions, can claim those exemptions, which means that waste doesn't have to be managed as a hazardous waste. This generator, to his credit, understood what waste he had and wanted it buried in a more secure location for his customers. Well,
I know, I'm just saying.
Does that make sense?
No, because
I'm sorry.
what it says that you knew what it was, they knew what it was, because they wanted it in a more secure place. But you're saying that you didn't know what it was, and they didn't know what it was. It's got to be one or the other.
I don't think we said.
I think we're saying that our controls need to be better, and now they are. There's an official new level.
They're always
of
better
control.
after the fact.
That's right. And engaging the Oregon Department of Energy is a new element there too.
I have one question.
I'm sorry, I confused you. I saw you saying you were confused. Okay.
Were there more questions?
Okay, we've got the vessel coming in unplacarded. So no red flags. Everybody look at, okay, let's get her dumped, boys, let's get out of here. But, okay, you're a hazardous waste facility. It comes with a hazardous waste profile on it.
That's right.
So, and then who's doing what with that? Do you have a man looking at it, or does it go through a computer and it goes, yep, this is acceptable for our landfill, we'll take it? Or are you just relying on the boy pulling the tarp off, that he's gonna take a glance at it and see if it's allowed there? I'm just curious how that process.
That's good question.
That is the waste profile process.
Yep.
And that's that multi-step analytical process where we require the generator to answer a long list of questions. They provide information, we probe it. We go, if we don't completely understand what it says, or if we need supplemental information, we go back and forth.
You're receiving this prior to the product
Yes.
being shipped to you.
Exactly.
I get you.
Yeah.
And an approval is given before the material arrives at the site. So
Yeah,
there's a decision made based on that waste approval process, whether or not this facility is permitted to accept it. and our process broke down.
When it comes to the site, they come with a manifest that has that approved profile number on it. And then we go through a process that matches that approved profile in the manifest and a bunch of other paperwork. So we know what we're supposed to be looking for, right?
So the computer information that's already been, where the approval has already been made, matches up with what the driver brings in his hand.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I just keep hearing North Dakota. Is that just, was it one company or was it just?
That's a good question.
It was one
So
company.
it's not North Dakota. North Dakota really, that's just the state that these oil and gas fields are in.
Right.
Okay. We have what's called a generator, right? The generator is the guy making the waste, right?
I guess I wanted the name of the company.
Yeah, it's Oilfield Waste Logistics.
Okay, okay, all right, that's what it says in our paper right here.
Yes.
And then, had Waste Management ever received other materials from this company without this type of?
No.
No, it never had.
No, and the first thing the agency said was, show us everything you got on these waste loads, which we gave them, and are there any more, right? I can say with a relative amount of certainty that there are no more, right? One of the things, the pieces that we added to this process was if a profile shows up with radioactive isotopic analysis, lab isotope analysis, if it shows up claiming some exemption in Oregon for radiation, if it comes from certain industries like this customer, right, upstream oil field waste management, those profiles stop right at that point. Our people don't look at them. They're sent to our technical expert, third party, that reviews them, and he has the technical expertise to say, okay, you got this, this, and this, but you don't have that, I need that, right? So he gets through that whole process knowing the requirements for the radioactivity. He makes an initial determination, okay, this doesn't meet the requirements. So we say, sorry folks, can't take that, right? If he says, I've reviewed the rules, I've reviewed the profile, I have all the information, I think you can take this, then we're going to be handing it off. The new thing for us is we're going to be handing it off to the Oregon Department of Energy and saying, do you agree with his determination? Okay. If they agree, then I think we could take it, right? If they don't agree, then we won't take it, right? We put things in place so that this will never happen again.
I just had one follow-up on that. Was all this radioactive material contained in what I heard the reference called dirty socks? Is that what it's in?
Yes.
And then how is that stored, the dirty socks?
They're in the landfill.
But are they just like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're not encapsulated in insulated, they're just the bare sock.
Yep.
Goes into the landfill.
That's correct.
So there wasn't any suspicion when something like that showed up at all, when the tarp was thrown over?
No.
And they saw those dirty socks?
No, because it met what the profile said. The profile said it was going to have filter socks, pipe scale, and debris.
I see, because there's a lot of stuff that goes in those type of material like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that same filter sock, just so you know, I mean, in a stormwater treatment system anywhere that uses a bag filter,
Right.
they look exactly the same.
I got you.
I think we've got a time for like maybe one or two more questions. So let's start with Steve and then you in the back.
You talked about the measures that you took to put things in place going forward. How far back have you gone to look at potential other companies from fracking, where states that have heavy fracking industry, Oklahoma, other states?
That's a good
starting
question.
Like 2010, I think, is when the big boom started happening.
So our profiles have to be recertified annually. So the generator the profile is put on hold if they haven't recertified it. And we may ask for more analytical in that profile process. But we look at those profiles annually. And this process now, again, if it has any of those components, goes through that extra piece. We take our people out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And just one last follow-up. Was anyone terminated from Waste Management as a result of this?
No, and we wouldn't talk about that anyway. That's an employee, maybe a HIPAA issue, I don't know. But,
Yeah, company policy is that we would not discuss HR-related issues.
Yes, sir.
So those trailers, and we were talking North Dakota, and then you said maybe it's not North Dakota, maybe it's Montana.
It's not the state of North Dakota.
So they were loaded, where were they loaded? They were loaded?
North Dakota.
In North Dakota, okay, so.
Not by North Dakota.
I don't want to get into your contract process or anything like that, but I think this is a need to know for everyone, is that you load those trucks up in North Dakota, do you pay them to transport that stuff here, or are they transporting it on their own dime to get it here? The reason being is that they went across 4 state lines, someone's responsible for taking that across 4 state lines without properly identifying it. And it's either that you guys pay for it to be transported, or they pay for it to be transported over here. And I think that's going to be an issue in the future.
Okay.
I'm not trying to be,
No,
I respect
that's a good question.
out there and doing what you're doing. But
And I respect your questions.
Need to be asked.
Yeah,
and I
no.
think it needs to come out. So.
Excellent question. So in this case, the generator, Owl Logistics, because they're a logistics company also, they owned and operated their own conveyance transportation. We, on many occasions, but not in this case, we supply transportation for our customers if they need it. This generator just happened to have their own logistics company with trucks and trailers that they supplied it themselves.
All right, any last questions?
It'll be really quick, it's not technical, it'll be fast answered. So obviously this has really damaged your relationship with the local communities. What are you going to do to fix that? You know, are you going to make a financial contribution to our local community, or some sort of investment in our local community to start rebuilding some of that? Maybe on the order of whatever you were paid to take the stuff in?
Well, I hope that the people in this room know enough about us as a strong employer and a community partner that we come in with some investment money in the Goodwill Bank. We've been operating at Columbia Ridge for 30 years, at Chem Waste for 40 years, largest employer, strong community contributor, strong contributor for the chamber. So I hope that we have some stock already. You know, the corrective action plan is going to look at what we need to do differently, what we need to do better. I think it really begins with our employees and making sure that our employees are healthy and safe on the work site, making sure that we have the right safety training, that we have the right processes with the waste profiles that build confidence and trust among our employees. So they know that we're allowing waste to come in that we're permitted to manage. So I think that's the beginning point, and we're open to the discussion with the community. We're going to keep being the good community partner that we've been. I mean, I think that you've seen us being a strong community partner. I don't think that will change.
Chris.
So I'm Chris Fitzsimmons, a Gilliam County Emergency Manager, and I've worked with you guys quite often in the past, but one thing that has really kind of dropped by the wayside, and it really hasn't occurred lately, was, this is a request more than anything, but we used to meet with you guys, the local first responders, EMS, fire, law enforcement, both hospitals, all the clinics and stuff like that. We used to come out to the site and have a safety committee once a year, a safety meeting once a year. We'd go over the contingency plan, and then you guys would give us a tour of the site. Well, we have a high rollover in volunteers, And so we haven't done that in quite a few years.
We should do that.
So my request to you was to bring that back.
Absolutely.
Because we have a high turnover in all of those aspects, and it would be wonderful to get that, even the connection to the first responders back out there, to see what you guys got going, and try and build some trust even with the first responders.
Sure.
Because of the situation.
Yeah, no question.
Thank you.
We, as I said before, we welcome anyone to come out, but first responders, we want you there. There's no
Yeah,
question.
and it'd be nice, like everybody, one-stop shop all together. And you can always send me that information, and I can get it out to everybody.
Cool. That would be great.
Try to be the building for you.
Do you have a card with you today, Chris?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Rita?
Yes, I had an idea, brainstorm. You guys probably think, well, this is ridiculous, but I think that protect the employees, the communities in the area, and Waste Management Chem Waste, that any loads that come to the landfills to be processed should have somebody capable and honestly enough to take seriously, to investigate each load, may it be by rail, get up alongside those rail cars, and probe for, radiation, the heat, and all that stuff, and find out which side it actually does go on, because there's been goof-ups between the landfill side and the chem side. We've received stuff that should have been on chem waste side over in the landfill.
And you're right, it's because our company depend on our employees to always, so in this case, the expectation is we can never make a mistake. I don't think that's realistic. There's going to be mistakes made. People are people, they get tired, they do whatever they're people, they make mistakes. We're held to such a high standard at Chem Waste, we can never make a mistake. When we do make a mistake, though, we own up to it, we notify the agency right away, and say, here are the things that we do. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're not going to make any more mistakes, because we are, right? Hopefully they're documentation mistakes and not something that rises to the level of this. But again, we train our people. We want them to, be as accurate, and I don't think there's anyone out there trying to defraud anybody. If we knew, well, I have enough trust in our employees that they have high enough integrity to do what they're trained to do and do it honestly, because they're part of this community too. And I'm sorry. So we make mistakes.
Well, it's just, because a lot of people that bring stuff in don't always,
They make mistakes too.
And that's why,
Yeah.
when it gets to the,
Right.
the final destination, at least they have comfort in themselves.
I hear you. I absolutely hear your concern. We want to make sure that we give our employees every opportunity to be successful and to be perfect, but we know that they can't.
Yep.
Did you have a?
Yes, it's our job to make sure those systems are reliable and that we're in full compliance. Our commitment is full compliance, and nothing is more important than the health and safety of our employees and the community and our relationships with the community. So we have some rebuilding of trust to do, and we're going to be working very hard to do it. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Thanks. So for folks who didn't get enough of this, we'll be doing a town hall in Arlington at 5:30 tonight at the high school gym. So if you had a question that we didn't get to, I think hopefully we covered everybody. Feel free to join us up there. Again, a reminder, this meeting, as well as the one this evening, will be posted through the county's website. We'll have both of those up. I'll ask Kelly to try to have those up by probably Friday at the latest, if not sooner. So if you hear of somebody who missed this and wanted to follow the conversation, those will be up there. And I think that's it for the town hall portion. I also just wanted to thank Department of Energy and obviously Waste Management for making the time to come for both of these on and sort of answer your tough questions. So I appreciate that, and as well as people showing up and participating. This was great.
Big time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shows you care about your community.
We've got a few just small things we need to wrap up on the agenda, and then we'll be done. So we're down to 6.0, which is just announcements, and the next meeting. Obviously, I just mentioned the town hall tonight at 5:30. March 11th, we're going to be doing a road tour up the north end of the county with our roadmaster, the same as we did in the south end a couple months ago. And our regular meeting is on March 18th in Arlington. We'll be on the 18th. Any other business to come before the court?
When do you expect to do the operational grants?
Yeah, so there was a question on our operational grants. Those will be taken up at the budget committee. It'll be their second meeting, which is April 8th. Okay. Those will come up. So for those who are at home, the reminder is that that deadline is this Friday at 5 o'clock for those to come into Kelly in the treasurer's office.
Are applicants encouraged to attend the budget committee meeting?
The budget committee is open to the public, so if you would like to, the process will be the same as last year, which we have a review committee that looks at those first, makes recommendations to the budget committee on funding decisions, and ranks those for us. So the hope is that the court members, the budget committee members will have those with enough advance time that if they have questions, they'll reach out to organizations directly before that actual meeting. But it is a public meeting, so all are welcome to come and watch us work on the budget. It's fascinating stuff. So any other questions or things to come before the court? If not, it is 2:56 and I'll adjourn the meeting.